I nearly died at the top of a mountain with 3 strangers and my best mate. We were on our hands and knees trying to navigate across the striding edge. The UK was about to witness the worst storm in 100 years, and I didn't actually know if I was going to see them later. My body just continued to release adrenaline, and I couldn't seem to quite place what was going on. My body was still dealing with stress and releasing the same kind of chemicals as being stuck at the top of a mountain and nearly dying. So I thought, because I thought life's fast, I might as well do my introduction whilst I'm sorting my life out for the week. So for everyone that is joining me on this YouTube channel, thank you. I massively appreciate this. And I wanted to give a bit of a backstory as to how we got here and why I've decided to do this and what I'm deciding to document. So on January 26th of 2025 this year, I decided to join my friend Dill on a hike up the top of a mountain in the Lake District called Helvellyn. I had no prior experience to hiking, and from the conversations that I had with Dill, essentially we believed that this was going to be a pretty normal hike. Unfortunately, earlier that week though, the UK released a storm warning and announced that the UK was about to witness the worst storm in 100 years, and we kind of regrouped on a call before the weekend that we decided to go up there and said, is this a wise idea? How far are we looking to go? You know, and most importantly, for the story at hand, what route were we going to use to climb Helvellyn? Contextually, one of the routes which I was really most keen on doing, known as Striding Edge, which is quite a technically difficult route to climb, let alone in the middle of one of the worst storms that the UK could ever experience, and has taken multiple lives in summer, let alone winter, was one of the routes that we kind of recognized that we wanted to do, take photos of, and is definitely one of the most scenic places. So we decided to push ahead, essentially. The game plan originally was that we were going to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning from North London, and we were going to try and get to the top of Helvellyn by 9 o'clock in the morning for sunrise, which is quite a late sunrise in January. So we set off, and it took about 4 hours in the car to reach Helvellyn before we pretty much arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, reassessed kind of the weather report via one of the Lake District weather reporting apps so that we could not only just see what the weather was going to be in general, but also at the summit as well as the peak, or sorry, the base and the summit of the mountain. Still obviously with more kind of experience in this field than me, having never even hiked before since, I mean, if you can count Duke of Edinburgh, decided that it was a good call, but we had to be down the other side of the mountain by absolute latest 4 p.m. So yeah, it seemed pretty easy from there. So as a result, what ended up happening, we began to essentially start the hike from the base camp, and up until a certain point we were walking through grass and terrain and, you know, small little stone rivers and bits and pieces, and it was all just quite a lovely experience. And I wasn't necessarily anticipating anything. You know, Dill and I had spoken about more of a safe hike in these climates rather than necessarily even trying to get to the peak, or, you know, going via Striding Edge, this hardest route that we, you know, read up on. And before we know it, we'd actually made friends with 3 other guys that, you know, were looking to climb Helvellyn as well. So halfway up the mountain, we began forming a bit of an allegiance with these, you know, with these other 3 guys, and we made a kind of a pact of 5. And when we spoke to them a bit further, it became clear that we all wanted to go via Striding Edge. And so safety in numbers, it made the most sense that we all look to do this together. So yeah, that was kind of how things started. That's what's led me to kind of this point. It all sounds a bit bizarre, but I do honestly believe that, you know, sometimes things are kind of, you know, procured and planned for you rather than necessarily you decide the moments that are going to call upon you and, you know, become life-changing necessarily. But yeah, we began the hike and everything was pretty straightforward until that point. But then it was when we started to reach an altitude high enough that rain and, you know, just general precipitation in the air started to turn to snow, that we realized like it was genuinely winter and this could be a bit more dangerous than we planned. We reached the foot of the Striding Edge, and I decided that this was probably a good opportunity to check in with my parents. They were out in the countryside themselves, having a very different experience, and I FaceTimed in, and we sat, we found a rock to perch by. Everyone started, passing around a couple of bits of food and drink, etc. And we all just were like having a quick respite, and I kind of just said hi to my parents and just said, oh, we're about to do the difficult part now. I'll see you soon. And, I'll send you a picture from the top. So I hanged up the phone, I put my ski goggles on my head, just because it began to snow a little bit. And within the next 5 minutes, the storm on the mountain picked up to such a point that it was a blizzard. And we were on our hands and knees trying to navigate across the Striding Edge. Contextually, Striding Edge is probably one of the most, difficult climbs that you can do in the United Kingdom. And, a small gust of wind is known to be taking some lives. Predominantly people, of an older demographic, but nonetheless, like it became very dangerous. And we're suddenly at a point where we're scaling rocks without, shoe spikes, without ice picks or anything, with just our gloves and our hiking shoes to try and get to the top of this mountain to safety. By the time that we made it about halfway, we realized that it was probably a lot more safe for us to try and reach the summit, where we knew that it would be flat and we could scale down an easier way than necessarily returning down the Striding Edge. So for the next 4 hours, my body just continued to release adrenaline as we basically scaled the side of the mountain as slow as possible so that we could guarantee our safety, but also to a point where we knew that time was running out because the storm was going to pick up to a point where it would be so bad at 4 p.m. that we'd probably have to lock in. So yeah, it was quite a life-changing experience that has led me to this point, which I will contextualize shortly. I nearly died at the top of a mountain with 3 strangers and my best mate, and it was basically going to be my whole fault. No one told me to go and hike this mountain, especially with all of the weather warnings and everything that we were expecting, and at any point we could have turned around. And the last conversation that I had with my parents was 10 minutes prior to any of this actually happening was, I'm all good, I'm just having a bit of food and everything's going great and I'm going to see you later. And I didn't actually know if I was going to see them later. We were facing troubles in our group nonetheless whilst we were scaling this mountain, as only some of us even had goggles and equipment to be able to see properly. But there was a point where only some of us that had even thought to bring sunglasses and ski goggles were essentially leading the rest of the pack that didn't even have any visibility and were essentially just navigating this blindly. It was also a point where, for anyone that has hiked before, you probably know that once you do the Striding Edge, there is quite a significant bit left over where you still have to ascend basically to the summit. So what essentially turned into, a hike in January essentially turned into quite a difficult, mountain scale through ice and snow, where to each side of you literally only had a meter before there was like a 3,000 feet, maybe a bit of an exaggeration, maybe a 2,000 foot drop, but you wouldn't even be able to see your own deck because it was just so white and a bit, and that really, really hit. So yeah, I didn't die and I'm still here. It was a pretty decent Sunday. I met these great guys and we formed a great team, and I've never had to rely on strangers so much in my life. But once you go through a kind of a trauma bonding experience like that, I think your perspective kind of changes, and you don't see these people as strangers, you see them as something different. But nonetheless, Dill and I finished the climb. We descended down the other side, which was arguably just as hard because the weather had picked up so bad, and we went into a pub. We split a caramel sundae, and I think both of us just needed like a cup of tea just to try and settle down. And thank you to the lovely people at this pub. They even put the fire on for us so that we could dry our clothes, because we'd just been battered by basically a blizzard that had turned into sheer rainfall by the time that we descended to a point where the weather was wet enough to turn the ice back into rain. And yeah, we drove back. We went back to London. I pulled in at about 9 o'clock that evening, and all I had to show for it was just absolute footage of carnage and these fantastic photos that I was able to take when we came through it and we reached the summit. That's when kind of everything clicked. I tried to sleep that night ahead of going to work, and it all kind of descended upon me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. According to my Whoop and my other statistics that evening, my resting heart rate during my sleep was about 85, and essentially adrenaline was just still running through my body up to 5 hours after the the event. I went into work the next day with some high, intensity, high pressure projects taking place. I still found my body still releasing adrenaline, and I couldn't seem to quite place what was going on and how my body was still dealing with stress of work and releasing the same kind of chemicals as being stuck at the top of a mountain and nearly dying. And that's what really pushed to this point. I found the quote that I was looking for that's kind of stuck with me, and it was from Confucius, who said, "We have two lives, and the second begins when you realize we only have one." And I think that for me was arguably my turning point in deciding that I needed to lock in a lot more than I thought I already had. It's very rare that in this day and age that you can find yourself in predicaments where there is an actual danger of life and death, and you realize the finiteness or the preciousness of life itself, and how you need to make the most of it whilst going through this short journey. And so I just started to lean in to try and figure out a lot more about what I'd gone through to get a better understanding of it than I originally had. So I'm very fortunate enough that via the company that I work for in the music industry, I was able to reach out to the HR team essentially to make sure that I've got access to resources and extracurricular things that may help me benefit my career and me as a person. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to get in touch with someone that I thought could help me navigate why I find stress in the workplace similar to stress in a life and death situation. And so I was put in touch with a great life coach called Abby Jackson, I believe her name was, and we essentially had a session via the life coaching company that she works for called This Is Glow, and we discussed essentially what causes stress, why we feel stress, and how we can avoid stress. I started the conversation by prefixing everything that I'd gone through in the month prior with climbing this hike, and I talked a lot about the kind of the chemical responses that I felt, and adrenaline being a big one of them. And I've always found that when it comes to high stakes moment at work, whether it's a campaign or a project or a certain activation that I'm doing that has a lot on the line, I find that I go through those similar experiences and adrenaline rushes and kind of heightened senses as to what I experienced at the top of this mountain, essentially. And she broke it down and made it really interesting by asking me to kind of distinguish the difference between pressure and stress. Pressure is something that we always feel, especially if we care about something, and it's a reflection of your values as a human being, as it was explained to me. And we only feel pressure around things that we take seriously. If you don't take something seriously, you're not going to feel the pressure of it. So therefore, when top athletes in their field, try to go into an Olympics final race or a Champions League final or an M1, an F1 Grand Prix, it's a case of you've tried to practice and simulate this moment as much as possible so that it feels a lot more ordinary to yourself, and it takes the pressure off so that you're able to just perform as if this was a training moment. And that's why I guess for a lot of the top athletes, businessmen and other people, it's a case of you fall to the level of your experience and your training rather than necessarily rising to the occasion. So how does this translate? Pressure falls into the category and becomes stress when it begins to compromise on certain things that you don't necessarily have the answer to. So in this case, instinctively, or for most people in the workplace, it's a case where you feel stress from your projects, you feel stress from your workload, your KPIs or your OKRs, when you don't have an understanding of what the outcome is for you. What happens if you don't achieve the objective or that you're feeling pressure from? How does that affect your reputation? What happens? Do you get fired? Do you not get the reward you're looking for? Do you not necessarily see the kind of respect and the gratitude that you should get for having worked so hard on a campaign? And it's a lot about the unknown. For me, it was always a case of feel the pressure of campaigns because there's a job expected of me, and as a result, I want to try and rise to the occasion. And sometimes you can't always rise to the occasion. It's a case of you have to give everything your all, but you want to know what happens if your all and everything that you've done doesn't achieve the success that everyone's expecting. What happens if it falls short by something that's out of your control or down to someone else's expectation? And that's what caused me stress, because I found myself, I wanted to make sure the job was achieved by my own merit and make sure that everyone else around me also kind of fulfilled fulfilled their role. So what is the situation, and why do we still feel that, you know, our body releases stress, which is something that's supposed to be a survival mechanism, seems to also correlate with our job, our relationships, our personal lives, and our financial, you know, kind of well-being? And it's because in a very complex way that works in the brain, and for everyone that's different and is affected by different stresses, we see this as kind of an attack on our livelihood. If you don't perform on this project, are you going to get made fired? What happens if you're fired? You know, do you have to go find another job? Are you, you know, going to struggle for income? Are you going to end up homeless? It's the way the brain seems to spiral, essentially. But you can also kind of use these stresses to wake your body up into another gear. I believe it was Cynthia Eden who said, or at least popularized, the idea that there's no growth without pain. And there is an element that you have to constantly keep yourself under stress in order to be productive. And for me, that day earlier this year essentially symbolized to me that I've only really got one life, and it can be taken away in an instant by choices that I choose to make or things that I choose to kind of let happen to me. So I might as well make as many choices and be as productive as I can. And as a result, I've decided to try and bed in the idea that I need to do more hard things. There's a Japanese word for doing something that you consider hard on yourself twice a year, and it's referred to as a misogi. And it's the idea that you take yourself out of your comfort zone every 6 months to push yourself as a human being and kind of callous your ability to deal with complex situations. And for me, that's where I am now. I'm 6 months into this experience, and all I've done over the last 5 months is try and push myself to a point where I'm trying to become better, both across my work, my relationship with both friends and my girlfriend. I'm trying to become fitter, I'm trying to become stronger, and I'm trying to become someone that is more dependable on, that, you know, my friends and my family can rely on a lot more, rather than thrill seeking and, you know, trying to live life for my own personal experience. I've realized that I wanted to compete hard in hyrox. I'm at a point now where after my last race in Berlin, I managed to get a 1:04 open time, which, although is not absolutely fantastic, it does prove to me that with a little more focus and a little more push, there's no reason to say that I can't go sub 1 hour by the end of the year. My second race that I did was in London at Olympia, and I got a 1:13, which is a massive improvement for me, but it's nonetheless, it shows that now that I'm willing to lock in, I need to be able to push this further. If I'm able to achieve something like a 1:06 within the next hyrox season, where does that take me? Does that open doors for podiums in certain regions or markets? And is there an opportunity for me to even potentially go to world championships in my age category? The second thing that I'm looking to do is I want to continue to keep a consistent low body fat and keep myself in shape. It seems to have been a problem over the course of the last year where I seem to fluctuate quite heavily. I'll have quite an intense summer cut where I've seen my body peak at about 39 kilos of muscle mass and then 6% to 7% body fat, which is brilliant. And, you know, I was able to perform and, you know, sustain it at a quite long level to where I am now, where I'm currently sitting at about 10.5% whilst maintaining the same level of muscle mass. The problem with this is that I find myself binging quite a lot and kind of toying with the idea about how seriously I want to take my fitness. Ultimately, depending on the goals that I've got in hyrox and the other things that I'm looking to do outside of, you know, my career, I think it's important that I have to take, you know, my diet a lot more seriously, and I have to start fueling myself like an athlete if I want to compete like one. So yeah, and the final goal that I have within the fitness space is something that I would consider a lot more misogi related. I want to just put myself through various different challenges and compete at that top level in multiple fields, not necessarily just hyrox, but, you know, what other hiking races can I do, triathlons and other things that just seem to excite me and just push me further on a annual basis or half a yearly basis. The second set of goals that I have is a lot more relationships based. I'm currently in the works of moving into this lovely flat with my girlfriend as of September, where she lives at the moment. And my relationships goal is to make sure that I don't take my eye off the ball and take for granted the people that I've got around me in terms of friends, family, and my girlfriend. And my laser focus on training and my career doesn't overtake other things that matter. And also, I'd argue one of the most important things is my career goals that I've got going forward. I want to push my career to the max, and although I'm looking to document it in a way that I don't think anyone else in the music industry has ever documented their run or, you know, their longevity of their career, I do want to push this as far as it will go. And I want to, you know, lead on great campaigns. I want to meet and work with great artists, and I want to stay on top of all of that whilst handling all of these other parts that are my life. So here's how I'm going to look to do it. Firstly, my Misogi goal. With my next Misogi goal coming up in the next 6 months, it's about what can I do that's going to push me to kind of keep myself locked in to a point where I feel like I have enough ambition as when I felt climbing down the side of the mountain back to the base of the Lake District. And for me, I think I found a perfect opportunity. Kieran and I, a friend of mine who is a top marathon runner and ultra marathon runner, Kieran recently completed the London to Brighton 100K and came second with a time of 9 hours, 15 minutes. We're looking to compete together in an ultra marathon challenge, which has been set up by the ARC project. This is the second ARC project that has ever taken place, and this challenge is going to be 5K every hour for 24 hours. It's being referred to as a last man standing run. They've released the location of this event, and Kieran and I are going to be competing against, I believe, 200 other people, trying to see how many 5Ks we can do on an hourly for the next 24 hours. I'm hoping to get to at least hour 18 of this and subsequently 90K, but this is going to be a true test of mental fortitude because it's not a case of ongoing, it's a case of stop-start based on how quickly you can get your 5Ks done. The next challenge that I've got set up is hyrox Rome. hyrox Roma was announced, I'd say 2 months ago from today's date, and for me this feels like a good opportunity to compete against other athletes in a pro race. Being half Italian myself, I thought this was a great look. Having done Madrid, it felt like a pretty easy course, and I'm already pushing to try and be in a better league than when I did Madrid. So for me, this feels like a good time to kind of see how far I can push myself over the course of summer ahead of this race in September, and potentially, you know, PB with a sub 1 hour 10 pro race, and, you know, potentially podium dependent on who else from my age category is going to be competing. So it's all to play for. Following on from that, based on ticket sales and kind of popularity of the race, I've also decided that I'm going to be competing in the hyrox Open Solos in December in London. This race for me is not necessarily about a podium. It's not necessarily about a world's qualification, as from next season onwards you will only be able to qualify with a pro race podium, but it's more about, can I go sub 60 and what does that feel like? And then my final kind of goal within the fitness space is to get another race in between the Roma Pro and the London Open. For me, there looks to be 3 distinctive races that make the most sense. This being Paris, Stuttgart, Dublin, and I guess Birmingham as well. Although all 4 of these feel like quite popular races, they do look like a good opportunity for me to get another pro solos in and potentially try and push my PB even further. My backup plan for 2026, if I'm not able to qualify by the end of the year for next year's World Championships in Stockholm, is to push myself to a level within pro racing that I could almost guarantee a win or a podium place in another region. Having looked at some of the average times of races and podium slots across, you know, Asia and even parts of Eastern Europe, it does feel feasible that I could potentially, you know, secure a 3rd place in my age category with a 106 to a 108, depending on who else turns up and who else is fighting for those world champs positions. So that's currently how my rest of year for fitness is looking. Essentially, it's going to all kick off next month with an ultra marathon or a stagmented ultra marathon, followed by a hard training camp with a couple of friends and family ahead of hyrox Rome in September, followed by another race in the October-November period, and then finishing off the year with a sub 60 hyrox solo open attempt in London. That's where I am when it comes to fitness. So how does this line up with a very demanding career, building a relationship, and, you know, trying to, you know, spend time with friends and family and living in London, which is almost impossible? I think the answer is just to lock in, and that's what I wanted to document. I think I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not even a personal trainer. My career is very demanding, as I said, and usually requires requires me to be, you know, office hours from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m, doing calls internationally, working with artists where, you know, single campaigns and album campaigns can be quite high stakes. But nonetheless, I feel like it's a lot more recognizable to other people. And I don't see a lot of normal people trying to balance these things and talk about it. But ultimately, I feel like there is a demographic of guys out there that go through this more so than, you know, feeling like they can resonate with top athletes, training programs, you know, being able to train 3-4 times a day whilst having, you know, optimum rest and recovery. It feels like this is a lot more realistic, and that's why I wanted to do it, to convey the stress and the stakes, the high pressure positions that I put myself in, because you've only got one life and you might as well just give it 100%. So yeah, so I guess that's what you can expect from it. You know, I'm just gonna try and document everything that is taking place and try and release videos to kind of discuss everything that's going on in the form of vlogs, training montages, you know, even just tips and tricks. And I just appreciate everyone's feedback. There's some exciting stuff that's gonna be going on, and I'd love to just kind of talk more about how I'm managing all of my training in terms of following hyrox programming, recovery, just trying to be my best version of me whilst also balancing that with, you know, traveling for work internationally, you know, calls, working with relationship and managing everything and compiling it all into the craziness that is my life. But yeah, I appreciate everyone that, you know, is willing to check in on this, and not every video is just going to be so sit down and talk to the camera. A lot of it is going to be more about interactions, experiences and craziness that goes on in London trying to be an athlete. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is all very new to me, but who knows, I thought it could be something interesting. I'll talk to you later.